talk. I happen to be from Detroit, Michigan.
Oh, so you know more than I do.
And little fact you may not know is that I now live in, I live in Greenwich Village. And what made Greenwich Village as cool as it is in recent history is all these people leaving Detroit in the late 1970s and 80s. There was a migration of creativity that came to Greenwich Village and made it really cool. And it was about the music scene and the fashion scene, and they were all working together. So I could talk forever about Detroit. If you leave Detroit and you never, there's a part of you that stays there. This is my context for livability today. And I would say the measure of it is the amount of times that I've thought of leaving and that I end up staying. And I've raised my daughter there, and I teach at Parsons up the street from there. And you just keep on. It tries to kick you out, but you realize there's something there. And it has a lot to do with the fact that Greenwich Village is the battleground of what is sort of modern utopia of the 20th century. There was going to be a highway through there. I'm wearing the Robert Moses t-shirt. Anybody who knows who Robert Moses is was going to turn this whole neighborhood into a highway system. But we fought back, and it's our muscle memory as to what livability is. So no matter how, there's a lot of change that's happened recently, but there's a lot in terms of how this neighborhood pulls back. I spend my time working with clients thinking about the future. We do a lot of consulting around forecasting and thinking what the future should be. Our idea of the future in the 20th century was this kind of utopian idea of some perfect point that we could move to. It had a lot to do with the technology we had. It had less to do with the people that were going to live. So I see sort of like pictures like this of the future in the past had, seemed to be very comfortable for machines, not so comfortable for people. I think in some ways that we have more technology than we have ideas for that technology. I mean, there are a lot of fans, I'm sure, of autonomous cars, but the fact is that what problem does that really solve? There is a human, we have to look at technology as creating a solution. We have to look at the future we need versus the future we get. We get a lot of the future, which is what the technology is capable of doing, as opposed to really thinking more deeply about the future we truly need as human beings. And it challenges the idea of what design thinking can really do in terms of that. Design thinking kind of looks a little too focused in terms of solving one problem that's in front of us. It almost has a lot to do with what we already know versus what we don't understand yet. And I think we need to expand that more into a systems thinking approach of thinking about designing and sort of creating futures. There's a great book by Stephen Johnson, How We Got to Now, and he references this thing called the hummingbird effect. The rapid, the way in which that hummingbird's wings, how fast they beat, has as much to do with how that bee pollinates that flower, right? So it's all of these things working together. Systems thinking gets us out of that sort of myopic, sort of too focused, and looks at all of the other things that we're not aware of that are actually truly creating what is that future that we would want. And it helps us also get away from this idea of only future perfect scenarios. We have to kind of really champion more the mundane and look at kind of the ways, as much about the ways things can go wrong as just the ways, the perfect way that we design that we imagine that they'll work. And so therefore it's more leaving a sense of kind of malleability, adaptability to how we look at anything that we start developing in the context of the cities that we have. We have to really reveal kind of a mythology. For every rule we make, any design we have, there's a counterpoint to that. Are we looking and seeing that mythology? Or are we seeing kind of every rule, there's a rebellion against that rule? That's important to know. And that rule being challenged is going to be contextualized into a new ritual that will become a more sustainable future. That cycle of the way in which mythology works within cities is so critical. we have to understand that cities are systems. They are. If I want to look at it and find a really great city, I look to bike lanes. Because a lot of cities have bike lanes, but all of those cities are not equal. Just because you paint a green line within a city doesn't make it suddenly a cyclable, safe, culturally happy city. It has as much to do with looking at how people use that. In New York, for example, we have bike lanes, but I don't think we're really there yet. I mean, I see people jogging their babies on bike lanes. I see people moving things. It's not thought of, it hasn't been wired in yet in terms of being thought of as a mobility, a way of really moving from place to place. We have to really see that and be able to understand how that's working. We look at kitchens. We can get so focused on just looking at the kitchen, but the kitchen is an access to the whole world in which we look at food security. We look at where's that food coming from? Is that kitchen teaching us what food means? If you look at the kitchens of the 1950s, 60s, 70s, they cut us away from what food was truly about. And so we need to be able to think more broadly to be able to create a better connection to those food systems if we're going to get to food security. Another is how we look at work. If we look at offices as part of a system, we should be looking just as much at education. Because what kind of work will we have? You know, the kind of work in the future, it used to be that we were 9 to 5. Now we're not 9 to 5. That's going to change. That changes education, that changes transportation, that changes all of these different elements that we need to now be able to see. And so you can design an office, but that office should stay open to that kind of sense of malleability, adaptability over time. It's very, very critical. You look at the greatest, we've gone through the cities that are doing it well, but one of the things that's a common theme is there's not one thing. It's a combination of these things, right? So in a way, we have to kind of get that vision. We have to sort of gain a sense of visual intelligence to be able to recognize what's working, why is it working. It tends to be these things that aren't obvious. It's culture. Culture is what I was talking about before, that migration from Detroit. It was the music scene working with the fashion scene in New York City that brought about a culture. It was that these different elements were working together that suddenly created a place to be. You see it within how coffee works with food, works with different things. It's all of these different elements. They are a system of meaning that are important to what makes for a vital and vibrant growing city. We need to move away from the concept of smart cities. I mean, smart, what is smart? We have to think more in terms of smart is a single point. We need to think more in terms of emotionally intelligent cities. Cities that are capable of continuing to learn. They're aware. They know how to use data. We talk about data a lot. What data are we looking at? Are we able to read that and be able to turn that into some kind of a design action that's actually going to make things more livable and more sustainable? I like to sort of point to this particular quote in terms of sort of summing it up. It's that music is the greatest way of sort of understanding what cities really need to do. Because it's not about the notes you play, it's about the notes you don't play. And the reason I bring this up too is when you think in terms of the era that we're in the 21st century has everything. We hear about artificial intelligence. We need to start reclaiming what are human beings truly good at? What are human beings truly good at that machines can't replace? And that is knowing the silence, knowing what not to do as much as knowing what to do. I think in some ways, with technology, we have a lot of notes and we don't have music. With cities, we can design a lot of things and we'll say, if I design them, things will work. But it's more about pulling back and allowing for understanding who's moved to that city, what are they doing? How do we cultivate what's already there? Are we seeing what's there to be able to cultivate things that are happening naturally? That is what I would leave with you. Thank you.